Now that our flap is complete, you can set it aside for now, and we're going to work on assembling the exterior body of your bag. Take one of your body C exterior pieces and lay it on your work surface right side up. And then take your body C pattern piece, and you're going to mark the location of your magnetic snap on the right side. So if you look at your body C pattern piece at the fold line, you have your half circle magnetic snap mark right here. So you're going to go ahead and mark that location on the right side. And then you're going to follow the same steps as your flap, and you're going to place your washer over the mark. And sadly, I've lost my pencil. Here we go. And you're going to go ahead, mark the location of your prongs. You're going to cut them out again, apply your fray check, and then you're going to insert the other half of your magnetic snap, so the one that has kind of a hole in it in the center. And I'm also going to do the same technique as the flap, and I'm going to add a scrap piece of Peltex on the back, then the washer, and then once again I'm going to cover it up with a scrap piece of fusible woven interfacing. Now I've gone ahead and installed the other half of my magnetic snap into one of my exterior body C pieces. I want to make sure that I have the magnetic snap in the correct position. So you'll see on your pattern piece I have a direction arrow, and that's just to show you which direction your fabric should be in. So I'm just going to quickly make an arrow in the same position so that I don't mix up the position of my snap. You're then going to take your second exterior piece, and you're going to place them right sides together, and then paying attention to the direction of your arrow, you're going to want to sew them together along the bottom edge. I'm going to pin these together. And we're going to go over to the machine now and sew these together. I've gone ahead and sewn my two body pieces along the bottom edge, and I made sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end of the seam. I'm going to take out my pins, and now you'll see they're sewn together. You're going to go over to your ironing board now, and you want to press the seam open like this. Now the bottom seam is pressed open. You can see the seam allowance is pressed open. I'm going to go over to the machine now, and we are going to top stitch the seam allowance along both sides of the seam. Before we start sewing on our piping, let's make a mark ½ inch from the top shorter edges on all four corners on the right side of your body piece. This is just a mark to show us where our piping should start and end. Now we're going to do the piping on the sides, the longer sides here of our assembled body pieces. Now I know piping is really something that a lot of people don't like, or they're afraid to try. It's actually really easy. Hopefully some of my tricks will help you a little bit. I buy this, I sometimes make my own piping, but if I use pre-made piping, I found a brand that I really like, and it's called Wright's Bias Tape Maxi Piping. The reason why I like it is because I like the size of the cording that they use. I don't really like super thick cording on my piping personally. Everyone is different, so use whatever size that you like. But I do like this one because the width of the tape, the bias tape here, is exactly 3/8 of an inch, which if you've sewn a lot of my patterns, that tends to be my standard seam allowance for assembly, except for a few exceptions. So I also like this tape because it has a bit of a stiffer feel to it. So it's not going to shift around as much when you're sewing it on. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how I add piping. Also, just so you know, I don't have a piping foot attachment for my machine. I actually just used my zipper foot, and there's a slight elevated edge to my zipper foot, which actually fits perfectly over top of the cording on this brand of piping, which is probably another reason why I like it so much. Now I'm not going to pin the piping to the body pieces. I tend to just bring my pieces to my machine and sew it on. So I'm going to show you how I sew this on with my zipper foot. I'm going to take one end of my piping and I'm going to put it at the mark at one top corner of my body piece, and I'm going to make sure that the end sticks out towards the outside of the body piece. And then I'm just going to stick this under my zipper foot. I'm just going to sew a couple of stitches so that it stays in place. I'm going to leave my needle in the down position. And then I'm just going to turn it like this so that the raw edge of my piping is lined up with the raw edge of my body piece. And then I'm just going to go ahead and sew this on with a basting stitch and 1/4 inch seam allowance. And maybe you can't see it, but the cording is under that raised part of my zipper foot. And then when I get to the mark at the other corner, all I do is I do the same as the beginning, and I make sure that my piping curves outwards. Back stitch, and go. I now have sewn my piping to both longer sides of my assembled body, and we're going to set it aside for now so that we can work on our side gusset pieces and our D-ring connectors. Take both of your D-ring connector pieces and draw a line through the center along the longer side, so lengthwise. And then we are going to take them to, if you're using fabric, you're going to take them over to your ironing board and you're going to press both halves in towards the center line so that the raw edges meet at the center line. If you're using vinyl or faux leather or cork, you can just actually sew them in place. So you don't want to press those materials. You're just going to take them over to your machine and you're going to sew them in. So you're going to fold them in towards the center line, and then you're going to sew them in place with a 1/8 inch seam allowance away from the center line. So I'm using fabric, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to I'm going to press them in place. I'm now going to sew the two halves of my D-ring connectors. I've gone and pressed them both halves in towards the center line, wrong side together. And now I'm just going to go ahead and sew these down with 1/8 inch seam allowance from the center line. I'm going to do the same for the second one. So now they're both done, and we're going to go over to our side gussets and attach the D-rings using these. Now I have one of my sewn D-ring connectors, and I've decided to use my triangle rings. At this point, your D-ring connectors are 1 inch wide by 4 inches high. So I'm just going to slip one end through my triangle ring, and then I'm going to fold in the raw ends towards each other on the wrong side. And you can either use pins or clips, whatever you prefer. I'm just going to use some clips for now, just to hold them in place. Right, there we go. And then you're going to take one of your side gusset exterior pieces and you're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, and then you're going to mark the center at the top and the bottom edge on the right side. Now you're going to take your side connector with your ring, and you're going to place it with the raw edges of your strap. They're going to be facing down, so you should see a finished strap on the top side here. And you're going to center the D-ring connector with the center marks on your side gusset piece. And you're also going to want to make sure that the top edge of your D-ring connector strap is 1 1/4 inch from the top edge of your side gusset piece. And then you're going to want to pin this in place. Now we need to sew this connector in place. You're going to use a 1/8 inch seam allowance from the edges of the connector, and you're going to sew it in place using sort of like a rectangle box of stitching. So you can start on one side, go all the way down, then across, up the other side, and then across, and then just make sure you do a little back stitching so that your stitches don't come apart. Now that we've attached the D-ring connectors to our side gusset pieces, if you'd like to add a rivet now, you can go ahead and do that. I love adding rivets. I think they look very nice on a bag. Now we're going to attach these assembled side gusset pieces to our assembled exterior body pieces. We're going to set aside one of the side gusset pieces for now. And we're going to attach the side gusset by lining up the bottom center mark on your side gusset piece with the middle center seam on your assembled body pieces. You're going to line those up and you're going to clip them right side together. We're then going to line up the top corner on the side gusset piece with the top corner of your body piece on one side, and you're going to clip those right side together. You should probably trim some of the piping if it's getting in the way. I'm going to do that. So once you've clipped the top corners on that side, you can do the same for the corners on the other side. And then we're going to go ahead and clip the rest of the edges in between those clips. I like to do it this way because if you've made any mistakes with your seam allowance, you can remove clips and adjust as needed. Now, if you're using piping on your bag and you don't have a piping like mine that has exactly 3/8 of an inch of bias tape beside the cording, the best technique is to sew the side gusset to the body pieces with your basting stitches facing up. So the basting stitches on the body piece facing up with the side gusset piece on the bed of your machine. But since my piping is exactly 3/8 of an inch, I'm just going to go ahead and sew with my side gusset piece facing up. So now we have our side gusset pinned to our body piece along one of the longer sides, and we're going to go ahead and sew these pieces together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I have so many problems saying seam allowance. My machine doesn't have a really clear marker for the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, so I kind of use this nice little tape. So we're going to start, and you're going to backstitch, and then try to stick to a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance as closely as you can, so that your piping ends up looking nice. I'm just using a regular foot here. I'm not using my zipper foot to sew these pieces together. And I kind of feel for the cording of my piping to make sure that I'm sewing as closely as I can to it. I like to sew, I mean you could sew with the body piece facing up, so this way down, but I prefer to sew this way with my side gusset piece facing up. But you can do whatever you feel more comfortable with. Go slowly around your curve, and then I kind of reach underneath and I adjust the fabric so that it doesn't all bunch in a weird way. And backstitch at the end and cut your threads. So now they're sewn together. This is sort of the moment of truth to see if I've done a good job with my piping. Looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim my seam allowance, and then I'm going to attach the side gusset to the other side. Now I've attached both side gusset pieces to my body. You can turn your bag right side out once you've attached those pieces, and just have a look at your piping and make sure that you're happy with it. If you see a spot where maybe you can see some of your basting stitches, then just go ahead and turn it wrong side facing out and just sew in a little bit closer. It helps if you sew with your basting stitches, the basting stitches that you use to sew on your piping, because then you can just make sure that you sew on the inside of your basting stitches, and then when you turn your bag right side out, you won't see those basting stitches anymore. So if you're happy, we can move on to attaching your flap. So you're going to want to take your flap and you're going to want to turn your exterior shell of your bag so that the magnetic snap side is down. And then you're going to take your flap and you're going to pin the top edge of your flap with the top edge of the body piece, and you're going to want to make sure that the snap side of your flap is facing up, and then you're going to want to pin or clip the top edges together. I'm just going to go ahead and use some clips because I like them. I find them easier to put on and take off. And then you're going to baste your flap to the body of your bag. You can just use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can just baste it on. You don't have to sew it on permanently. You just want to hold it in place.